Welcome to your Reticular Activation System, hacking your brain for good, also known as manifesting, law of attraction. So many amazing things about our brains and how they function and how we can use knowledge about how they function to help us get the things we want to get out of life and reach those goals. I'm so happy you could join us today. We've got a couple people here in the actual Zoom with us. We're going to be streaming this live on social media. We'll share it out to YouTube and save that video for those of you who can't make it today. So excited to be here with you. I am Kara Keenan. I'm the Executive Director of Going Beyond the Pink and the founder and CEO of Cancer Wellness Institute. We are both co-hosting this opportunity for you to learn all about reticular activation. Now, I want to preface all of this by saying that cancer patients and survivors particularly deal with some mindset changes when they're diagnosed and then as they go through treatment and move into survivorship. There is something about knowing you have cancer in your body that all of a sudden makes you realize priorities are different and makes you change how you prioritize things in your life, makes you not want to take for granted the things in your everyday life, right? You see joyful moments and things like that a lot. And that's not to say that over time that doesn't change and kind of normalize. And it's also not to say that folks that don't have cancer don't experience those kinds of things. But it is almost universal to people that are diagnosed with cancer that you feel some kind of change in this way you see your life and with what you want to do after. And so today we're bringing you this workshop on reticular activation to honor that idea that you might want to change something in your life. But this information applies to everyone, not just cancer patients and survivors. So if you are out there and you are just frustrated with some part of your life, or you really just want to learn how to change your focus or change your perspective or your attitude, what you will learn in this session will be helpful. So stay tuned, stay on with us. I'm going to give it just a couple of minutes to just let other people jump on the lives on social media and to share it out so other people can see we're doing it. And then we're going to dive right in. Uno momento. Okay, let's see. We are live now, and I'm just going to share that. Okay. I think I've got that taken care of. All right. And I will be checking chat both in the Zoom and on social media in case you have any questions, pop them out there. But if you're getting this after it's gone live and you're just seeing the recording, no worries. You can still post your comments and questions in the chat. We'll definitely get back to you. All right, so we all have something called a reticular activation or activating system. And it has to do with our consciousness. So I'll start there. We all have an idea of what consciousness and unconsciousness is, right? We know that our brains work in ways that we don't always see or are aware of on a conscious level. But consciously, we know that consciousness is essentially a state of arousal or an ability to be aware or pay attention. But when we are in our environments, there's so much stimuli all around us, right? We are bombarded by words and sounds and body language and gestures, stimuli, light and dark and movement, all these things coming at us constantly. And it's so much information that we can't possibly process it all and be aware and conscious of it all. So our brains have formed this reticular activating system, which is essentially a bunch of neurons in our brainstem back here, right? And it works as a filter, right? The reticular activation system is essentially our built-in filter that allows some information to come to our conscious awareness and some stays in that unconscious realm, right? We're getting all of this input from our environment, but our brain has to filter it somehow so that we can be conscious of what is important and not have to pay attention to the things that aren't necessarily so important, right? So I'm looking at notes because I don't want to miss anything here. It's such good information. So this group of neurons is not only essential to this filter, but it's also really connected to our sleep and wake cycles, which are our circadian rhythms. And I mean, you've probably heard that word circadian rhythm in the past, right? Where we know that it has to do with light and dark in our sleep cycles. But actually, every part of your being has its own circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm that you've heard about before is like your master clock, right? And this master clock is intimately connected with this reticular activation system. Within this system, these rhythms, they release neuropeptides. One of them is called orexin, and you may or may not have heard of that. That one is released in response to light stimuli. So light is recognized in our eyes, and it is processed through this system, right? Where it's recognized, it's connected into this group of neurons in your brainstem. And then that information, it causes this release of orexin, which then tells the rest of your systems that it's light. And we do certain things when it's light, right? Our digestion system quickens, our breathing quickens, our heart rate quickens. It's all different than when we're not receiving that light stimuli and everything is kind of quiet and recovering and processing. It's also responsible for the release of serotonin, which is related to mood regulation and pain sensation, all things that are important to all of us, right? But all of this all works in the same system that is responsible for your attention and your arousal and your ability to focus. And that all brings it into that reticular activating system. Now, you've experienced the power of this filter every day, probably all day. But I want to give you some examples of when you might recognize how that's worked in your life. Have you ever been out to dinner at a restaurant that's like loud in the background, or been at a party where there's lots of people kind of talking in groups all around, and all of a sudden you hear your name across the room and you quick turn and you pay attention? You've been through that? That's your reticular activating system at work, because your filter already knows that your name is important. It means that you should pay attention. And so your brain knows that when it hears your name, you should turn and pay attention to what's going on. Another example of this, young parents, sleep deprived young parents. There have been lab tests where they'll have tons of noise in the background, like trains going by, factory noises, all this stuff going on. And the young, exhausted parents will sleep through all of that noise. But when their baby cries, mama wakes up, right? Because her brain knows it is important to filter that information and to pay attention to when her baby cries. Well, the really interesting thing here is that we can influence that system, right? This process has happened throughout our lives. This knowledge our brain has gathered about what is important and what is not important. It's not a one and done kind of situation, right? This is a process where your brain takes in information and then it's out there looking for similar things that it can connect to that information that it already knows to be true. That information helps to filter your perspective and helps to tell your brain what is important. Your RAS, it's called, right? Your reticular activating system also seeks information to validate your beliefs and your experience, right? So it's going to listen for and pay attention to things in your environment and prioritize those things for your conscious awareness that builds upon these things you've already told it are important. Why is that important to know? It's because it can both be very limiting or it can be really empowering if you know how to tell your brain what's important. Let's take things like stereotypes as an example. We experience a few things happening. This type of person is always really loud, right? And so you've experienced that a couple times, and then your brain starts to form this perspective and idea that that type of person is always loud. And then the next time your brain sees that type of person, you make a judgment immediately that that person is always loud, right? And whether or not you like loud people, your brain's going to prioritize whether it makes you consciously aware of that person, so you know whether you want to stay or you want to go. It can be very limiting. It can be limiting when it comes to your health, your politics, the way you interact in your relationships. But when you know how to tell your brain what's important and how to get that information to stick, it's incredibly empowering. Think of everything that you could do if you could tell your brain what was important. Take a second here. You could be more successful in business if you could tell your brain that you were successful in business. We've talked here a lot about gratitude and how gratitude and the practice of gratitude can change your life. Meditation and mindfulness, all of these practices that can change your life because you are telling your brain that these are important and to prioritize this. Gratitude's a great example. We know that people that practice gratitude often feel more joy and calm in their life, and they are more likely to see the things that bring them joy in their life. And it is because of this reticular activation system. So by telling yourself every day, I am so grateful for the sun shining. I'm so grateful this rain is feeding the plants that are going to feed me ultimately. I'm so grateful I'm learning a lot from this really hard experience. If you're the type of person who doesn't typically default to that thinking and you practice it over time and you just find the things and you force yourself to do it, you will gradually over time start to default to that. You will notice the sun shining and the rain and the dew on the plants, and you will notice the important lessons you've learned instead of feeling down and depressed and angry, right? So this practice of good habits is important to your reticular activation system because it literally tells that filter, this is what I want you to pay attention to. You've probably heard this as manifesting or the law of positive attraction, or some people call this like the newest hack for hacking your brain, right? If you've been out on social media and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and places like that, you've probably come across something that talks about the power of this. And again, it is simply this practice of telling your brain what's important. I want to share with you one way that I do this practice. I am definitely a goal setter type of person, right? I have lots of goals and I do a lot of work and I put a lot of energy into achieving them. And for a long time, I would get really, really frustrated when obstacles would happen. And I kept focusing on the fact that everything always seemed to go wrong. And I would get really angry and frustrated because everything always seemed to go wrong, and why? And that really easily can lead you into this why me kind of attitude and mentality. You know what happens when you focus on why me and everything going wrong? You're going to notice every little thing that goes wrong. You've heard the saying, right? Misery loves company. You heard that? Yeah. You're going to notice when everything goes wrong. Misery does love company. But you know who else loves company? Joy and positivity, right? Success, all of those things. So something I started a few months ago that really, really helped me was not only having my goals and being able to visualize the things that I want to do in the future, or the things that I want to be able to achieve, but I started to write myself something called my 90-day letter. I didn't make this up. I found it out there amongst all these circles of people that are manifesting and doing things, and all the credit goes out to them. But I write myself a 90-day letter. And that letter is written in the present tense. And I say, Dear Kara, I'm so proud of you for achieving XYZ, whatever the goal was. I know that you're going to really do amazing things with that information or that energy. It's amazing that all of these people reached out for you for help with this particular goal, right? I write it as if it's already happened, and you can do that too. You want to improve your overall health. You're trying to break your sugar habit. You want to get more sleep. Whatever your goal is, whether it's business, personal, health related, write yourself that letter as if you've already achieved it. And then for 30 seconds every day, you can find 30 seconds in a day, right? Pull out that piece of paper, pull up the file where you type that, and read it out loud to yourself. Read the letter to yourself. That is a practice. It is a practice just like yoga and meditation and mindfulness breathing. It's a practice just like gratitude. And we know that the act, the physical act of reading it and repeating it will help you to pay attention to the things you told yourself you already did in that letter. It's a simple way that you can literally hack your brain for good and use the power of your reticulating activation system, right? Your reticular activating system. I screwed that up. But you can use that filter to force yourself to pay attention. But what we know, like with everything else, is it does take practice, and it takes the use of lots of areas of your brain. So you have to describe it in detail. Use your senses, right? What do you feel? What do you see? What do you smell? And then you have to use the muscles of your mouth to speak it out every day, right? Because using all of these different systems in your body is telling your body again and again that this is important and I have to pay attention to it, okay? Other things that are really important to being able to hack your brain for good. Did I ever mention how much I hate the word hack? It sounds so brutal. But the other way that you can really improve what this filter is seeing and tell your filter what you want it to see is you've got to take good care physically of this part of your body, right? We know science has shown that injuries to this back area, right? We have like brain injuries to your brain stem, but even brain injuries that simply impair the blood flow to that area can affect your reticular activation system, right? We know it affects your cognitive abilities and things like that. Something as simple as good posture. This is something I personally struggle with all the time, right? But keeping those shoulders down and the neck elongated so that this area, that the crimping doesn't happen, that you're not restricting that blood flow, is another way that you can help your reticular activation system. Doing visual exercises. Let me see if I can do this one for you on camera. You stick your finger out in front of you and you lock your eyes on your finger, but you move your head. So your eyes aren't moving where they're focusing. Did I do it? And you just move your head, right? Doing visual exercises like that also helps to stimulate that part of your brain right there in your brainstem, which can then train your brain to pay attention to what you're telling it to pay attention to. Have I said that a million times in this? Because it's so important, right? And then the last thing, and I know I've said this before, but adding in those practices of meditation and mindfulness, being able to practice honing in on the present moment is so important to being able to then translate that ability into telling your brain what to pay attention to. Okay. That's a lot of information to take in. I've been talking here for 20 minutes, so I'm going to give you a takeaway for today. Something that I want you to practice. I want you to think about silver cars. Maybe on a daily basis, you're going about your life and you never really think about silver cars. You don't really notice them. You know what? There's a lot of silver cars in the world. So when you're out and about over the next week, I want you to pay attention to how many silver cars there are. And if you need proof that what I'm telling you here about you can actually influence your reticular activation system and your personal filter to hack your brain for good, you'll find it in every silver car you notice out there on the road. Not driving much? Look for butterflies. Look for bees. Tell your brain what you want to see. Look for good health. But more specifically, know the habits you want to change, the things you want to see come to fruition in your life, and tell your brain to make it happen. And you won't believe the power in that. If anybody's got any questions, again, you can post those things in the chat or in the comments wherever you come across this video recording. And we look forward to helping you hack your brain for good. Thanks so much for joining me today.